I'm Andrea Goeglein, and today we are recording our second Politics Through the Ages. And with me again is, of course, Victor Creed, the incredible poli-sci student who, it seems from birth, fell in love with politics. Say hello, Victor.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me again. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. And then we are joined today by one of my peers and a dear friend, Valerie Williamson. And I will let Valerie introduce herself in a moment, but I will just tell you that Valerie is a person who helped me see the importance of politics in a different light. And we spent a lot of years debating, and we take different stands. And I really look forward to our conversation today, which is going to be on voting, access to voting, and that hot topic in the United States right now. So Valerie, please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background.
Yes, first of all, thank you for allowing me to participate in this important subject matter. My name is Valerie Williamson. I am a business consultant and have been for over 20 years. In between, I've worked for consulting firms. I've started my own consulting firm, and now I do contract consulting. That's about it in terms of my background. I was, of course, about to just launch into the whole conversation, but sorry.
Hold that for 1 minute and let me just set that up a moment.
Okay.
So today's conversation is going to be about voting. And I know that I, for one, have taken voting very, very much for granted. And as I mentioned in our first part, you know, I really only made a choice between whether or not to show up to work one time and voting when the person I wanted to get in lost. That is not the case for Valerie and obviously Victor. And so Valerie, if you could, as concisely as possible, give us a hint on when you realized voting was important.
Okay.
How old you were, how it happened.
Well, in my household, when I was growing up, voting was sometimes a topic. Unfortunately, a lot of the conversation was somewhat negative, like distrust. You know,
That's
people
fair.
are not being honest with you, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So as I grew up, I just, you know, had that in the back of my mind, but I knew that voting is important. So
Sure.
I would vote, and I hate to admit this, but I, like many others, would listen to the sound bites. So not really getting into the depth of the issues or who the candidates were, etc., but more or less what I heard on TV in the snippet or what I saw in advertisement in the snippet. And I think the real driver in my waking up, if you will, may have occurred in the year 2000. And
okay.
yeah, it was really interesting. I was watching the news and an announcement came on. This was live, right? So this was happening as the commentator was speaking. But later in the day, when the story was repeated, I noticed that certain details were left out.
Mm-hmm.
So the portrayal was a tad bit different than when it was actually in the progress of happening.
Oh.
So I realized that there was some editing and altering of facts going on.
Yep.
And so then I said, wait a minute, I was here when they announced when it was breaking news. That's not what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, I became like a junkie, right? So I was, I should say, a news or political junkie. And I started watching a lot of the different commentators and taking in information and realizing that you need to pay attention to what's happening. You can't just go by sound bites. You have to understand what the real issues are, what the motivation behind some of the messages are, or lack of messages.
Right.
And so from about 2000 on, I was like a diehard political junkie. So
Okay. And for those who are either young and, were maybe just being born around 2000 or later. So that was Bush versus Gore. And,
yes.
Obviously it came down to the Electoral College, where once again, the Electoral College dictated who became president of the United States versus the popular vote. Now, Victor, could you please tell us what your first voting experience was like? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, sure thing. So my first voting experience was for the 2012 presidential election.
Okay.
And so I knew, like, from books and class, the value and importance of voting, but never really had an opportunity. It was always kind of like this faraway thing that is important, but didn't get a chance to interact with.
Right.
So when it came to the 2012 presidential election, that one was my first time actually getting involved to vote. And for some reason, I woke up that day and I put on like a suit and like dress pants, like, this is in high school for me. So it was kind of like out of character. I just put on like this like suit, and then I went to school, and people were like asking me like, why are you wearing the suit? And I didn't really know why. I just kind of felt like it was like an important thing to do. And so that was like my first voting experience. And I would just always remember, because everyone was just like so confused while I was like wearing the suit, even though we were like watching all the political events on TV in class that day
Sure.
for the election. So that was like my first sort of jump into it.
Okay. And can you think back? I'm going to talk about the suit in a moment and give you a great story about that. But were your classmates also voting? Those that could, do you remember if they cared enough to vote?
As far as like go to a voting location, that I'm not too sure about, but inside of our school, we had like a mock election. And
Okay.
so all the different classes had a mock election of like who they could vote for, either Mitt Romney or Obama at the time period. And so that was sort of like an in-class project that we did. And that was kind of a very active and lively sort of a situation we had in school. But as far as like outside of the campus, I really didn't meet too many people who were talking about going to polling locations outside of it. I mean, there were a few other students like me who were kind of excited to actually go to a location, stand in line for the first time, get the little sticker, figure out how to use the machine. Like we always see it on TV, like, is it a lever? Is it a button? Like, what do you do? This is going to be very exciting. So that was my first experience.
Cool. Now, clearly, your experience, and if we are to believe any part of what's going on in the news, there is definitely an overarching narrative where, in fact, people of color in the United States don't have the same access, have different experiences around me, who nonchalantly, can decide whether or not I was going to do it or not do it. Valerie, because you are more mature than Victor.
Thank you.
Can you tell us some of your experiences? Is what the narrative is that relating to your experience?
Absolutely.
Okay.
To just kind of dovetail on what Victor was saying with the Obama election, I think for me, even though I had become more engaged, I think for me, the impact of seeing myself on TV in that way was, I don't have a word to describe it. And I can only imagine what some of the younger individuals were thinking at that moment. But yes, you are correct, which is why I became involved in the first presidential election, going out and registering individuals to vote. I don't know if you remember the Harry Reid and Sharon Angle election. I was out registering individuals for Harry Reid as well.
Okay.
But what was really interesting and was kind of heartbreaking actually, is that while I was out, promoting voting to individuals and asking them if they were registered, and if they were not registered, offering to register them on the spot. And I was really disheartened by some of the reactions. Like, some people would say, oh, I'm not going to register to vote because my vote doesn't count.
Right.
Oh, I don't have time. So people, I mean, there were clearly people who were enthusiastic and would sign up, But to hear so many people disconnect from this important topic was disheartening.
Yeah.
You know, so to your point, if you don't have the access or you don't have the same access, and then you're given the opportunity to get that access and you turn it away, it's kind of hopeless, right? You feel like it's kind of hopeless. So you just try to talk to individuals in the most common sense manner to get them to see how important it is to register to vote, but not only register, but then actually go out and vote.
Yeah, got it. And Victor, for you, has the experience, has it been a positive experience all along? Have you noticed problems within your community?
When it comes to like doing like the voter outreach and things like that, I have noticed that in terms of like, you know, African-American community, usually I don't find too many other like, I would say not until recently have I found too many African-Americans who were like participating and going out and doing like the door-to-door. But, you know, in the current time period of things like Black Lives Matter, I've seen like a large uptick in that. But previously, before that, you know, I always found myself to be like maybe the only sort of African-American minority. There would be other minorities there, but I'll be the only one.
Right.
And as far as when it came to like, you know, people's enthusiasm about the elections, I've only found, like, at least in my community, so once again, just so the African-Americans that I'm around, that it was a 2008 and 2012 elections where everybody, you know, knew how to vote, where to vote, what time they were going to vote, who they were voting for. And this was like such like a uniform thing. And that, I haven't really found an experience outside of those 2 years, because they could actually see themselves, you know, in that candidate, and they could sort of feel what the candidate's message was, and enough for them to actually really sit down and focus on like, this is my plan, this is my voting plan. And then outside of those 2 years, I've really seen like a decrease in sort of that enthusiasm for voting.
So our current vice president does not bring up that same devotion to voting?
Are you asking me or Victor?
Let Victor take it first.
Sure.
So I would say for the current vice president, at least from either the people in our peer group or the African Americans I'm around, I mean, it seems that his, I don't know, what would be the term, that his credibility, a lot came from Obama. So like when it came to the most previous election, you know, his association with Obama was, you know, played a large part into that. But as far as like the messaging and things like that, I can't really say anybody was associating that, or they could see themselves in the messaging or see themselves in that candidate. It was more like, this was Obama's right-hand man. And so because of that, let me go ahead and support him. Yeah. And so that was the association I saw.
But when he picked Kamala Harris, did that help?
So for representation, I do believe that did play like a large part, but it's still, as far as like that large like amount of enthusiasm, not so much so. And I'm not sure necessarily why that is, but at least from my personal experience in talking to people.
Well, you know, I'm going to give you a little part, and then Valerie, I'll turn it over to you. You know, I was at the February 2020 Democratic debate in Las Vegas. And, you know, at that point, Joe Biden was dead in the water, and our current vice president was no longer in the game. Like, that was the reality of that moment in time when this ticket came up. And, you know, whereas I deeply respect our president, he wasn't my choice of the candidates on the stage. So I can understand, like, I wasn't any more excited than maybe anybody else. So I'm not quite sure if that would necessarily be a racial discernment, or, you know, how party politics got played out. Now, Valerie, take us there for you. Did it matter? Does it matter that she's our vice president?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
I think it was a historic moment.
Yes.
And again, the power of seeing myself in someone of great responsibility was quite empowering for me.
Okay.
I think, though, that overall, after that historic event, the hoopla around it, if you will, or the press and the coverage that was given, the visibility isn't there. And
Right.
so because of her role and the fact that she's not highly visible, I think people are just kind of settling in and, okay, so
Yeah.
she's the vice president, right? So, and that's the role of the vice president. I get
I
it,
know.
but I think that the lack of visibility is having an impact or not having an impact on voter enthusiasm.
Yeah. You know, and what I appreciate about both of your contributions, you are talking about the emotion that goes into our discernment of who we vote for. Yes, there's the party parts of it. Yes, there's the policy parts of it. But then there's this other really big animal that
Yes.
eats at our heart.
Yes.
And we can ignore some of the others. I know in my case, good and bad, you know, whereas there's parties I can't vote for, there's candidates I cannot vote for because emotionally, even if they were the same policies I wanted, I'm not going near them. And I hear that from you on the positive side, that when you see someone that resonates as a human being and is familiar, that's going to contribute
Absolutely.
to how you vote.
And I think you used the keyword contribute, because it's not always the ultimate decision, right? It's not
Right.
that that fact is going to make you vote, but
Correct.
it does have some contribution into your thought pattern and your values, etc., to make that final decision.
And, you know, I think that's even the most true, at least in my, you know, street observation when it comes to female candidates. There is, if someone doesn't like a female candidate, even if they are policy aligned with that person, they can very easily decide not to vote.
Sure.
And I find that I don't know how we hold ourselves accountable for our emotion that better, because the importance of voting, whether they win the popularity contest or not, you know, I think is what, you know, this conversation is really about. I want to switch gears a little bit. And because this is about voting and your experiences and how we go about it, you know, we're recording this at a very unique moment in time, the first week of March in 22. And there is a country, Ukraine, that right now, I know this is the first time in my, at least several decades that I can think of, where a democratic voting country, it really is on the brink of losing the ability to vote. That it is not outside the realm of possibility that people who chose a democratic way of government and voted in people will no longer have that right in the same way. Is that kind of your both observation of this week? Victor?
For me, I'm sorry,
What?
I don't want to hog things.
Okay.
but for me, it's very difficult for me to put into words, because I don't think people grasp that the lack of ability to vote is not the only thing that Ukraine is going to lose.
Right.
And that's the part that's so frightening. Their entire way of life,
correct,
could be toppled.
Yes. No, it's pretty amazing what we take for granted. And you are correct. Victor, what's your feeling about this week and voting and what you're seeing happening?
Yeah, you had talked about the democratic election sort of being toppled, and they had previously had a president who was the Ukrainian uprising, which basically was to overthrow a president who was basically election rigging who end up being exiled into Russia in the first place.
Absolutely.
So they had just, got back to like their democratic foundation just for something like this to happen to them. So that was sort of the first thing I thought about when you had mentioned that.
Yeah, no, I remember Jimmy Carter. I remember one of the first sets of elections that I was paying attention to Carter being there. He was going to the Ukraine to try and, with that, whatever that global panel is that goes and tries and watch that the elections are actually fair. Victor, do you have any fear at this moment that you will not have the right to vote?
At this time period, no, but for a long time now, I am concerned that, it's becoming less and less of like a priority for people. It's kind of like you go to the store, right? And you're going to buy your favorite cereal. And then one day you go there and you realize that it's gone, right? So I'm not sure if that is necessarily analogous, but essentially what I'm trying to say is I'm worried that people are going to be relaxed right now. And eventually you get to a point where it's so difficult that you didn't realize, you thought, wait a minute, aren't I supposed to go to like a place and vote? When over time it's been historically, shrunk and made more difficult for you, and you didn't even realize it, or you wasn't paying attention as much when the news was talking about it. So that's sort of been my fear over like the last 2 to 4, 6 years.
So I want you to continue to talk about something, because clearly Valerie and I grew up in an age where we only had one way of voting. We went to a place, then there were certain circumstances under which you got mail-in ballots. And then more and more we lived in places where I could get it by mail. And since I traveled so much, I automatically vote by mail. Do you guys live in a place where you're closing down? I do not. Nevada actually is expanding, is one of the places where the ability to vote is actually expanding, not shrinking. What is it like for you, Victor, for you in your state?
So for me in my state, or at least my perspective on voting is I've been following like the voting process. But as far as like our state legislator, we have a Republican majority in the Senate and in the House, as well as like a Republican governor. And so they often do every session do look at voting, so-called restrictions and things like that. So that is something that we're always trying to be careful about. Gerrymandering in Indiana. Gerrymandering is a huge sort of controversy that happens at our state house that always involves like a lot of protest and lobbying and big battles that happen, especially with the newest census update. So personal experience, it's been okay for me, but our state legislature is something, it does focus on gerrymandering and voting restrictions.
So a high diligence is needed.
Correct.
Okay, Valerie, how about you?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I too live in Indiana, and I would agree with Victor. I think I just read the other day where the governor approved a gerrymandering map. So it's something that is ongoing here in Indiana, but because Indiana is considered a red state, it's not surprising.
Right. And in fairness, if there is ever a sin that both of the major parties are so guilty of, it is surely that topic. And that does make it hard. I am a person who, I went through a lot of iterations when it came to voting, from the standpoint, like early on, as a younger person, I bought into the things that I wanted everyone to be able to speak English if they were going to vote. Like I had all of these things that I would hear that seemed to make sense.
Of course.
It really did. Do I absolutely want your identity verified in some way or another, that there is a way? Absolutely. Do I believe that we do not just a good job at it, but a great job? Yes, unless people, like we have so many instances these last few years where people have specifically done things malicious. I mean, I live in a state where a very prominent businessman got convicted of filing his dead wife's ballot.
Right.
And that's a problem. I live in a state where the electoral group wanted to send in a false group, unexpected. And that, for me, that's a problem. So we're watching diligently, even though we have a large ability to vote here. You know, it's like we have it on all ends. If you had, Victor, if you had, like, you were the voting czar, what would you do to encourage people to get that we're not doing? Your generation, what are we missing? Why are we not getting more people voting from your perspective?
It does have to be sort of that convenience aspect of it. You know, over time, people are more looking for convenience in their daily lives, especially with the technology age. And so one thing that goes with convenience is you got to give people the day off on voting day. That's probably going to be the biggest thing where you'll see the most turnout, because one of the biggest issues I've noticed or kind of listened to is that people have to navigate, okay, I need to get off at work this time. I got to drive, you know, to this area. Then I have to stand in line. Either I'm going to do it on my lunch break or I need to call off that day. So having a day off is the least you could do as far as convenience for giving people the opportunity to vote or participate, rather than to deal with the hassle of, like I said, they got to try to do it in their hour lunch break. Well, if it's between that, they're probably just going to stay home. They'll say, well, somebody else will vote, or the election will be how it is. So they feel that disconnect, rather than, I have the day off, I can think about who I want to vote for. I have the time to do the research. I'm not being penalized for it at my job, so I can go and vote. So like I said, I think that's the least we can do to give people the opportunity to be more engaged with the voting systems.
Valerie, what about you? Same question. How would you get more people to vote?
Well, I'm in alignment with Victor in terms of what we can do right now, but I think long term we have AI, we have we have a computer in our hand and our phones. We do absolutely everything online, including our jobs. Since COVID, we do remote work. So why do we still physically have to go to a polling place to cast our vote? Why can't we do this electronically? Why can't we do this in other venues? So to me, I would be looking at the upgrading of technology to include the security and algorithms that could verify an individual. We do that with credit cards. We do that with online purchases. So it's just, in my opinion, the underlying issue is what we've been talking about, the things to deter people from. But if we were to open up and be creative and innovative, we could allow the convenience, as Victor mentioned, to be, you know, on the tech side, which would just ensure that everyone voted, right? There'd be nowhere to go per se, if you know. So to me, that's what I would do.
I'm pleased that you said that, because for me, I'm trying to figure out why this verification seems such a big thing, when in order for me to, you know, get my phone to open, I put my face in front of it and it knows that I'm the person. Like, if my phone is that smart, why is my voting process not that smart? I get really confused as to this conversation about all these fake people and dead people and all this other stuff. You know, you can't, the dead people don't have retinas. You can't actually take their picture. So why are we making it this hard? But I will tell you something that Victor has said that really resonated with me. There is something about going to a polling booth. There is the workers, the sticker, the whole thing, that although as a younger person, I will say, I thought that was a real pain in the butt, like, that I had to get there. And I do love my mail-in ballots. There is something celebratory and clarifying about going to a polling booth. And just like work, I think if we could have some sort of a hybrid celebration, maybe a happy hour after you vote or something like that, just to keep people together, because I do think there is something about that, that activity. So before we close, I'll give each of you an opportunity to make one plea to those that watch about voting this year and every year. Victor, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, so the thing is about, you want to use it before you lose it, basically, is the ultimate premise, right? Like, it may not seem important now, but one day the fear is that you'll wake up and you'll realize how much more difficult it has become compared to where you are right now. And that's something that we have to always be careful about. They always tell us in like elementary, middle school that, you know, a lot of people die for voting. Voting has a lot of impact on our future. And so one of the things, like I said, try to do is use it before you lose it. And that's basically the ultimate premise. Beautiful.
And Valerie, what about you?
I would say to be mindful in making your decisions. I know that it's very difficult for individuals to spend a lot of time researching, but I would plead with people to not base your decision on sound bites. If it's a local election, you have access to information on websites. If it's a national election, you have even more access on the website. Right. So I would just plead that people would be mindful in making their decision, whichever way it is. Just spend some quality time to understand who you're really voting for and whether or not that individual truly represents your values, basically.
Thank you. And I guess I would close by saying the following. I'm a person who loves to attach thought to everything I do. And I know for me, this week in particular, I don't believe I will ever vote again without holding the people of the Ukraine in this moment in time in my heart, that they are showing me that I have to pay attention, that I have taken something way too much for granted. And if you don't pay attention, it can be taken away. So Victor, it was wonderful. Valerie, thank you so much for joining us. I am Andrea Goeglein. I hope you're enjoying these conversations, and we look forward to sharing with you again soon. Thank you.